good to talk with you guys again. You got me once, now you got me twice. So there's going to be some similar things that I talked about this morning. I want to advance a little bit. As Noah's talked about high yielding beans, I always like to set the foundation, right? A lot of people want to say, what's the one thing, right? I gave a talk Tuesday afternoon, and the guy said, what's the one thing? I was like, well, let's go back to get the foundational things first, right? And so I want to do that. Hopefully some of the foundational things aren't too basic, but again, I want to have us all on the same level. You guys have heard me talk once already, so you know I like a conversation, okay? So if I'm going on and on, just say, stop. I got this question, what's your thoughts, all right? And so please do that, okay? So setting foundations, so if you guys have questions beyond today, I am probably going to hit the road pretty quick afterwards. I got a 7-hour drive. I'm trying to get back tonight for the kids and all. So you guys can shoot me an email, call, X, whatever you want, okay? So when I think about soybeans and high yield management, right, certainly you want to get into a number that's usually 3 digits, right? We want to think about our high yield beans. Does that mean that everything's going to get 100 bushel beans? No. But are there some concepts that we can use to kind of advance the crop? So whether you're at a 50 bushel level or 60 or 70 or 80 or whatever that is, let's try to level the playing field for the field conditions that you have, and then how does that translate? So again, I grew up on flat blacks like these tables are. Doesn't mean that you're going to manage it the same way. I spent 8 years in North Carolina. I grew up with farm in Illinois. I spent 8 years in North Carolina. And they looked me bold-faced in the eye and said, you don't know how to farm. I'm like, what? I grew up on the farm. I grew up with my dad and grew up on farming, right? We grew up on prairie drip, right? And when I was down in North Carolina, that day happened to be at a tobacco field. I had a soil probe that I put down in the ground, 36 inches, nothing but sand. So maybe you got something there. I don't know how to farm a 36-inch, sand profile versus the prairie. So there's things that we continue to learn. I was up in Ottawa last year for this event, and the conversation about some of the clay, and Henry's comment about tiling. I said, I thought we were doing it good. Some fields are going every 30 foot, and he's talking about 10 foot this morning. My goodness, what capital does he have in that tiling company that he's going to do that, right? So within that, maybe it's more iron too. He's talking about deep ripping too. So we get into this. I want to, the advancer's not going to do a pointing job, but so we certainly have some treatments that are going to get higher yields than others. This is kind of that teaser to go from 77 bushel beans to 99 to 100, right? We'll get to that one in a little bit. So when you think about high yielding beans or yield management, what are the factors? Again, you can cheat a little bit. Some of you guys are already doing it already. Actually, I think I got another slide over it, so you can't cheat fully. What are the things that you want to do to advance the yield of soybeans? So what are some of your top choices? Again, foundational as well as high yield management. Variety, okay. Maybe I've got that one up there. Variety selection, okay, what else? Drainage. Oh, good, we got that one. I don't have it up on there, but that's near the end of it. Drainage, certainly. Variety, let's go ahead and hit that one a little bit. The yield potential as well as the yield protection, right? Henry, you and I were just talking about a little bit already about SDS and the soybean cyst nematode and some of those interactions. And you said planting date, that's a huge one, right? Planting date's a huge one on this one. Timely planting is how I put that. I don't want to just mud it in, but I certainly have guys that are like, it's April 10th, Shaun, I'm going. It's like, what does the field look like? You can get away with it if you get some timely rains, but you're not always going to get away with that and have an open seed slot. So you still have to do your job to get a stand established, right? So whether you're dealing with, like one of the guys talked about putting row cleaners even on a 15-inch planter, stand establishment is huge, right? Beans can grow in the gravel lot. Right? There's no doubt about that, but you want to talk about the max yield potential. What can you do to get the roots growing out, accessing water, accessing nutrients, right? What else is on your list? Fertility certainly is a big part of that. I think I personally like narrow rows. The caveat is, do we have white mold or not, right? I get that. But usually whenever I think about yield management and just doing the simple operation of going 15-inch beans, so the beauty of a planter with the narrow row, and certainly as we go further north, getting that canopy closed is huge, right? Huge. And so if we think about running 30-inch beans, it takes a while to close the row. Again, white mold's the one that's going to put us off to the side, but Usually 15-inch rows, we're going to win out 5 to 10% yield advantage easy, right? That alone. SCN, so soybean cyst nematode. Again, there's going to be a lot of other factors that you guys deal with that we don't deal with. Weed control, you guys don't have any weed issues, do you? None, you got it figured out, okay? So it seems like we've got a lot of work there that we continue to get into issues, whether it's herbicide resistance or we're pushing planting dates now, right? So how are those pre's holding out? Are they holding out as long? All right, how does a pre work? How does a herbicide work on soybeans and weeds? So if you're going out middle of April, late April, and you're putting out a PPO out there, right? And it splashes up, how do those beans like that? They don't, right? How do soybeans, how do corn, how do they process that herbicide? They've got to take it up, they've got to, metabolize it, break it down. If we're pushing planting dates earlier, they're not growing as fast, right? They're going to have a hard time metabolizing that, breaking down. So we've got to think about how do we manage that for the weed control, but also for the plant's benefit, because slow growth, they're not metabolizing it fast. Right? So we've got to think about how we manage that. Disease and insects. Certainly, I've already mentioned a little bit about white mold. I think about Phytophthora. I think about Fusarium with sudden death syndrome. That's on the, think about the early season side, those cooler season conditions. We've got a new disease that's really come in the last couple of years. I didn't bring it up here for you guys, just so you know. Red crown rot, that's started to pop up for us the last 2 or 3 years. We've got about 7 counties that are hitting it, and it just, I saw a picture 2 weeks ago, it took out the whole field. So again, you have to think through how you manage that. I want to know that field. It's not just a rotation crop. If you really want to manage soybeans for yield, you have to know it. And so to be out there observing, fertility we already mentioned. So this maybe hits this next part of in terms of drainage. I think drainage is a huge part. So to make sure that we can get it off, I don't want wet feet early, right? I want those beans to get a good root system. When do you want the dry conditions if you have the choice? Do you want the June or do you want the August, September to be dry? June, everyone knows that. Why? You want the roots going down. So are the roots chasing after moisture? Trick question. Okay, you have the soil moisture lines in my hand. The roots are above it. Let's see if I can talk like this. All right, that's not good. Roots are above it. Are they chasing it? No. Bone dry soil, they're not growing. The soil moisture line's here, and then the roots are going down. It's pushing it down deeper and deeper and deeper. So you have that soil moisture line pushing it down. That's why we like that dry June. But again, if you're bone dry and the roots are growing in bone dry soil, they're not going to grow for long. They've got to have that soil moisture line that effectively push it deeper and deeper. So they're not going to get lateral, so they're going to go deeper and deeper. So yes, June, we want it to be dry, so we have a deep root system because now, come August, September, you've got access to water, right? You've got seed fill. You're going in 3/4 of an inch to nearly 3/10 of an inch of water per acre per day is your need during seed fill, okay? So what can we do to get that good root system for a season long? Soil, certainly some are blessed with 4% organic matter, those that have 2%. All this comes into just being intentional, right? This is again, I give a 5-minute, 20-minute lead-in slide here. This is all about being intentional, right? That's really what we're after. How do you kind of manage this? Not just throw it out there, expecting to get 75 or 80 bushel beans or better, okay? So foundational things, let's get into it, all right? Again, there should be out your table this handout that's more or less the highlights of this talk within there. So if you want to take notes, you want to cheat and look ahead. Some slides are on there, some aren't. So variety selection is huge, right? When we think about that, just in that alone, the yield potential, it could be a 6 to 12 bushel swing. So understand how those are doing for you in your area. Variety testing programs, whether you have it or whether it's with the seed companies to have good information there, as well as the problems that you're combating on the disease side, the insecticide side. Row spacing, I made that comment already, but I'll hit it again. We have a 5 to 10% yield advantage just going on narrow rows. Narrow in my case is 15 inches or less. You talked about drills. I'm not a huge fan of drill, but I mean, you can make it work, right, Henry? You can make it work, but about stand establishment, about rooting, that access to water, that access to nutrients, it's huge, okay? So what can we do to get there? We've done some high yield management studies where we've looked at 15s versus 30s. A lot of people said, I want to do 30s because I can run the row gator through there and not have any damage, won't lose out on any of that row damage, wheel track damage. We still yield out better on the 15s that have tire damage versus running 30s in an open row. Okay? So row spacing is huge. I think about that especially as we go further north, that get that canopy closed. You want to harvest sunlight, that's your job. You want those soybeans to harvest sunlight by the time they're flowering out the top. My cutesy saying is, I want them green to the eye by the 4th of July. Growing up, it was corn is knee-high by the time, knee-high by the 4th of July is what Grandpa said. I want the soybeans canopied. I want them closed by the 4th of July. So that we're harvesting as much sunlight as we can as we're developing flowers that are now going into your money makers of pods and seeds. Okay? Plant stands, for us, we're 100, 120,000, more than enough. That might change a little bit. Again, as you go further north, I dare say you might have a touch higher. It could be kind of an optimal stand as I think about growing season, the opportunity to get that canopy closed, but that's a place where we like to be. If you bring in white mold in that, obviously you want to kind of think about taking that back a little bit. The seed rate will change depending on the equipment. Years ago when I first came to Purdue, we had different seed rate recommendations that were based on row widths. That was partially true because what was a 7.5 inch row planted with? A drill. It wasn't planted with the planter. And what was the 30-inch row planted with? A planter. And then you get the 15. Most of them are actually, 15-inch planters. There's some air seeders, or you do knockouts on a drill. But by and large, it was the equipment associated with it. And so the seed rate recommendations, a lot of people say, oh, it's based on row width. Bull. It's due to the planting equipment. That's what it changes by. Okay? Timely planting, again, you guys have hit this one a little bit. Easy, this is a very conservative number, 4 to 8 bushels to just timely planting versus anything in the latter part of May. So again, just hitting these foundational things, it's about trying to optimize the season. Soybeans grow and develop due to what? How do they start flowering? The photo period, right? And we talk about it's the night length, right? Because if you're going on any highway and there's a billboard sign that's got a light on it, what's occurring around that light during September? Those beans are still green, right? You're breaking up that photo period, that night length. And so night length photo period is a big part of it, but pushing our planting dates is also having an opportunity to advance based on heat units. Most of us have the appreciation of photo period, but up until probably the last 5 or 6 years, we really didn't have as much appreciation for heat unit accumulation. You push the planting dates so then we can have more heat unit accumulation, to have more nodal development, trifoliate nodes, so then now we have more opportunities for pods before that photo period pushes us into flowering. Okay? And then again, we just need access to the water, nutrients, all of that. So here's one. I started in 2009, and so in 2010, 11, and 12, I had the opportunity to have 60 different cultivars from the 1920s to, at that time, what was present, mid-2010s. All right? Maturity group 2, maturity group 3, it was just fascinating. And I felt like getting a little nostalgic on you, so I want to kind of bring it back. All right, so here's what a 1923 line looks like. This was grown in 2010, 11, 12, thereabouts. All right, 1943, 1964, and a variety released in 2011. All the same R6 growth stage. What do you notice about it? The color, what else? Standability, yeah, we certainly have improved. Breeding efforts have allowed a lot with lodgings kind of coming out of that scenario. Color, that's going to be that nutrient content. We went down to the level we went out with V4, R2, R4, R6, and we just looked at every aspect of that from the leaves, stems, and pods. Visually, this does it well enough that we have, more nitrogen concentration, as you can imagine. Guess what? My talk this morning was on what? It actually has more sulfur as well. All right, so you've got this plant now that is not lodging. It's harvesting more sunlight because you think about that canopy is closing. It's a faster growth rate as well. The other things that come to this, you have more nitrogen concentration, more sulfur concentration, building blocks for chlorophyll, right? You can harvest more sunlight and photosynthesize more, okay? So that's kind of what's happened with the modern lines. One thing I want to share is not only have they changed in the way they look visually, but again, this pointer's not working, so I'll get up here. So as you look at 1970 line, let's see if I can break the system. Good. That's bright, by the way. All right, 1970, leaves are 24% of that whole profile. All right, you got stems of 20%, 56% in pods. As you look at the modern line, we have a third of our nitrogen's in the leaves by R6 now. Okay, so there's more nitrogen in the leaves at R6, less in the pods at R6 at that point. I won't do that again. All right, so there has that change. You have more nitrogen that's being in the leaves, meaning that there's something happening on later in the season. Okay, there's more work being done later. All right, I think, yeah, I do have it here. So we just looked at the 1960s variety. Got 3 of them in the background of that. 2010s. As you look at this, you think about the leaves, they max out at R4 or so in the 1960s. The modern lines, they're not maxing out to R6 in the leaves, that's the green area, okay? And then they're going to continue. They're going to continue to accumulate more and more nitrogen later. Same exact graph occurs with sulfur. I've just given this one as an example, okay? Another way of looking at that, the orange line here is dotted. 1960s by R6, you had maybe about 70% or so of the nitrogen taken up, and then they go up to about 75, 80%. Then they're done. What happens in our modern lines? By R6, we only have 40% of the total nitrogen, but what's going on? It's linearly continue to increase in nitrogen accumulation as you go all the way to maturity. Okay, these modern lines are doing a lot more later in the season. So what can we do to maximize that potential? Yield is certainly there. I talked a lot about this morning in terms of leaf retention, and if there is a sulfur play, that you're going to have an opportunity for more seed fill. Same kind of thing. What is the opportunity that you can set with your lines now that are doing so much more later? Okay, root systems ring a bell quite a bit to me, right? If you've got root systems that can access water when it turns off hot and dry, or when it turns off cold, right? You can have some major plays that continue to fill both in pod number and in seed size. Okay? This is all foundational things, hard to believe. All right, so seed rates. For us, I've had 60 field trials on this, so if we're at 85,000 plants by harvest, that's more than enough for us, okay? If you want to do it based on equipment, so within here, equipment's how I switched this, right? It's planters, 15 to 30s. All right, if we're assuming it's a 90% germ lot, again, we can cuss or discuss if we're getting 80, 85%, depending on the year, right? But 140,000 seed rate, that's fairly industry standard. Well, it actually matches up physiologically too. When we come into that, you have about 75% of those are actually going to establish, okay? So then by the early season count, you maybe have 100,000, 105,000. We're going to lose, even with the planter, we're still going to lose 15% of those plants through the growing season. Did you know that? You lose plants from that June stand count to the October stand count. Oh yeah, you guys don't do October stand count, so you don't know that. Right? We do it because I think there's something going on here. So keep that in your mind again, 15% loss. All right, so is it a weed? No, but boy, what can we do to kind of really get into this and hone in? It's like, let's not waste that ground. Let's not waste the seed. Let's make sure we optimize that ground, get the canopy closed as fast as we can without overpowering it with too many plants. Now certainly you can go higher rates. We don't have the weed effect, which is good, but it's still like, we got white mold, we got some other issues. Let's think about using this efficiently for profit. The drills, anything less than 10 inch, right? So my recommendation based on all our work is 175,000 is our starting point for that seed rate. Again, it's because of how that machine operates. That semi-controlled spill does not do a good job of metering it down the row, does not do a good job in seed depth, right? And when you go out and do stand counts on drills, you can fine tune them, but there's still gonna be some issues. You go out there in June, you're gonna have some plants that are V1, V2, you're gonna have some plants that are V5, right? They're all over the board because that seed depth is all over the board, plus the residue side of it, all right? So let's get our seed rates a little bit higher to maintain that. The interesting point of this is we only have 60% establishment. Here's that number again. 60% establishment. 40% loss, basically, when you run the drill. Again, so you think through, okay, I'm paying for more seed. What's the cost when we break that into buying the new equipment or upgrading or looking at something different? Okay, where does this price point for me? Okay, I'm not saying that you have to switch out from the drill, but boy, I'd like to have something a little more uniform in a modified narrow situation. What's interesting about this is we come in with early stands of 115,000 as our optimal, right? And then we get to harvest, look at there, we ended the exact same. It's not me making that up, that's 60 site years of data, right? That at harvest, we end up with 85,000 plants in the drill scenario, just like in a planter situation. Basically, it's just self-selection. The weakest ones die out, the stronger ones survive, right? Which ones are going to be the weaker in that drilled scenario? The one that emerges later, right? It's going to die down. Attrition, we lose 25%. So we have worse establishment rate, we lose 25%, and we end up at 85,000 plants at the end of the season. Okay? Yes, sir. Yes, Peter. Yeah, I think 80, I mean, that's what it kind of brings you down to, is like, what can you do to really fine tune at 85,000 plants? Now, again, if we're playing 85,000 seeds, are all 100% of those going to come up? No, we got 10% lost. But what can you do to maximize stand establishment? So whether it is the add-ons that some of these guys talk about with their planters, then we can start to fine tune. Okay, 100,000, 110,000, I could probably get away with that. That's if life's perfect. Life's not always perfect whenever it comes spring planting. I don't want to hedge my bet so fine that I'm like, okay, I know I get 90% germ, I put out 100,000 seeds, I'll get 90,000 stand, I'm great. Because what ends up happening? Either a heavy rain that you crust over, or you got, some cool conditions, you got slugs or anything else. So there is that fine line of balancing what those field conditions are going to be like. But yes, what can we do to establish as best we can? Active down pressure, uniform seed depth, all that comes to my mind.
If I maize seed, it's always 100% perfect.
All right, maize seed, 100% perfect. So, they've got the Jesus beans, what you're saying. So 10% coming back to life. Sorry, maybe I should have said that joke. All right, so fungicide and insecticide, seed treatments certainly come into play on this one. Yeah, you think about seed rates, if you've got good fungicide seed treatments, that's my play on earlier plantings, and think about seed rates. If you don't have it, I think we lose out on some of that standability, those issues. I'll go and make this one other point. A lot of this talk is agronomic production, but there's profitability comes into it too, right? For us, insecticide seed treatments, I don't see the need. I just don't. For us, I don't see it. Okay, so if I tell my guys, if you're able to pick and choose, seed treatment, go with the fungicide, especially if you're pushing plain dates that are cool or wet, that's going to be a case where I think that pays with. The insecticide, I can leave it off, right? So again, some of those profitability numbers that come to my mind. I did have the picture in here. Green to the eye by the 4th of July. So again, I want that canopy closed by the time we're hitting 4th of July. All right, that's roughly, if we're planting in our April to May sweet spot, we're usually going to be flowering at the top. R2, full bloom. Okay, that's the point I want the canopy closed. How many more days? So this is R2. On the left is 15-inch beans. On the right is 30-inch beans. How many more days is it going to take to close that 30-inch row? A dozen? I hear 2, 12 days, 14 days, 30 days, 44, 44, 40, come on. 20. Yeah, I mean, it depends. All right, get away from that answer. All right, so no, roughly, again, our numbers have been about 3 to 4 weeks, about 25 days longer to close that row. So losing out on yield potential because we're losing out on harvest and sunlight. What else is growing just like gangbusters in there? Weeds, right? Again, I know the big caveat is, well, what about white mold? Okay, I get that, all right? So we have to manage the white mold if that's part of your scenario. Let's have the lower seed rates, right? If you run 15s, fine. But just know that we probably need to cut the seed rates back a little bit because that microenvironment. Again, white mold comes in whenever you have flowering, you've got the conditions that are moist, and then you have all the apothecia come up and all the spores come up, right? I get that. All right, good time the R1, R2 fungicides can help in that regard too. So as we talked about that, I'd say that one's probably closed maybe 75%. I had the data set, I don't think I have in this one we did last year. Anyone looked at Xyway on corn out of curiosity? So no, but you can still lie, so you looked at it, haven't you? Okay. It doesn't take much to get across the border, let me tell you. They asked me yesterday, "Why are you coming over here?" I said, I'm coming to meet some friends. I said, "Okay, come on across, all right." They don't like whenever I come across the border and say I'm speaking or I'm giving a talk. Or if I'm working, that's not a good thing. So I've learned pretty early on, I'm just coming to see friends, okay? And I've got a truck. They never looked at it. It can come across. All right, so anyway, Xyway on corn, they talk about some of that starter fungicide on corn, some of that disease benefits. They also talk about some plant health benefits, growth. I bring this all up because they said, "Well, Shaun, what about soybeans?" And I saw some pictures from the industry reps a couple winters ago. I said, "Sure, let me go and look at the root systems look great." So last year I looked at Xyway on soybeans, and it's a starter system, right? By and large, not too many of us doing starters on 15, so it's a 30-inch comparison, right? So we did 30-inch beans with and without Xyway, don't have it in this data set, and we took pictures. They said it's going to have this physiological effect, canopy closure that goes a little bit faster, better leaf nutrition, all these things. Oh, by the way, they didn't ask me to look at it in 25, so that kind of already tells you what's going to happen. In 24, the canopy closure rate was exactly the same for untreated control as it was for the Xyway. The other part, and I bring it up as I see this, the Xyway on 30-inch beans, they didn't close it at R1, R2, they didn't close it at R3, the 30-inch beans, they didn't close till R5 last year in 24. So put that in your mind. It's one thing for me to say, "Oh yeah, it doesn't close for another 25 days. That's the end of July. That is R4 to R5. There is yield loss, certainly there. In that study, we didn't do the direct comparison. I've said this, I've done this for years, but to put a more real number, same exact variety, all the bells and whistles with fungicide, insecticide, I legal on it too. They ran 70 bushel beans in 24, 30-inch rows, 100 foot over in a planting date study I had, same exact planting date on 15s, nothing else done to it. It was 7 bushels more. 10% difference just because of row spacing, okay? So some reality to that. Timely planting. Again, these are these foundational things. So timely planting, here's just kind of the brass tacks of it. We push planting date, so then we have an opportunity before photo period pushes us into flowering. I mentioned this earlier. All right, soybeans grow and respond because of photo period, right, or indeterminates, and certainly we can think about some of the heat units as you go in elevation and go latitude here. But it's photo period, and it's not the exact same. And so here's the frustrating part of soybeans, is that, okay, if we've got a certain number of heat units, let's say it's 500 heat units to reach R1, well, it actually changes. It's roughly 500 when it's a mid-April planting. It becomes maybe 450 when it's a mid-May. So it's a moving target. It slides a little bit. And so then what we try to do is push the planting date so we can accumulate more heat units, so then we have more trifoliate nodes, okay? If we look at an average soybean plant, you might have 18 nodes, 19 nodes, trifoliate nodes, attachment points, right? If we go with the mid-Mays, or excuse me, mid-Aprils, early Aprils, I've gone up to 22, 23, 24 noded plants, same exact variety. Now wait till the end of May, it's down to 16 or 17. Okay, so it tails off in a hurry. You lose out on that nodal development. Again, what else does an early planted bean or a timely planted bean look like on those early nodes? They're slow growing and they're stacked. Like one or two of the groups this morning, I said, I don't want beans up to my chest, right? Those tall beans, that's a lot of vegetative material. I want something that's compact. I want, my hip, 36 inches, something like that, okay? So then we can harvest as much sunlight. That sunlight can go down into the canopy. When the leaves are shaded out, guess what happens? They drop, they die. You don't have leaves at the bottom, guess what also happens? You don't have good pod fill. The vast majority of the plant sugars that go from the leaves to the pods are the ones attached to that node. So if you lose the lower nodes, the leaves attached to them, you lose most of the pods too. So what can we do to have a nice compact plant? We don't want to overload it with too much seed. Get a canopy closed. Also think about the row spacing as well as a compact plant because we plant timely. Okay? Within that, we actually have more reproductive branches. So we get branches which are good, but they're also ones that are podding up. I don't want just vegetative material, right? I want to have this idea of how many layers of leaves do we need to optimize yield? maybe I'll ask this question. How many layers of leaves do we want over a given ground area? If you could choose a number, let's say you can have 4 layers of leaves, or you get a 5 layers of leaves, 6, 7. How many layers of leaves per square meter? I'll switch it like you guys do. You guys do metric and American units, right? So let's go on a square meter area. How many square meters of leaves do you want? You think more is better, right? There is a point where it breaks off. Thank you for that kind of him and haw answer. I can already see that. We can go up to 7 layers of leaves. It's called leaf area index, right? If we're maxing out at about 4, we're pretty good. That's efficient plant. So if we're anywhere from 4 to 5 layers of leaves, that maxes out our yield potential. We can go 6, 7, right? That's too much. That's too much vegetative material. We're just maintaining leaves at that point instead of pods and seeds. Okay? Clean rate's one way to kind of have that efficient plant. Seed rate's another one. Okay? Again, late April, early May. I dare say I should probably put this in more mid-April, depending on field conditions. But certainly that April period, conservatively, we'll lose 3/10, 4/10 of a bushel per acre per day when we go beyond mid-May. I've got some variety interactions by planting dates where we've lost upwards of 8/10 of a bushel per acre per day. So a 10-day delay means an 8 bushel swing, easy. Okay. So timely planting, again, this is what it's about. It's the idea of, okay, how can we harvest sunlight as much as we can for as long as we can? All right. One example is here. Let's say May 7th planting. When did we reach R1? About the end of June. Again, green July by the 4th of July is what I'm shooting for. That's hours of sunlight within our data set. All right. As you go to May 22nd, kind of push the planting date. That continues to push down the season, right? Some people that say soybeans respond to photo period, and that's all they respond to. If that was all it was, they would reach R1 every single time the exact same day. This is an example of they need a certain level of heat and accumulation as well as photo period to reach that flowering. Okay? So that flowering is pushed later and later. The flowers have become the pods and seeds, right? So you're losing out a day on July 1st versus that day on July 30th are totally different, right? The hours of sunlight, the megajoules, I don't want to get into megajoules, but that solar energy is totally different, as well as the photo period, as well as thermal energy, right? So not only are we, canopying earlier, harvesting more sunlight, you have more opportunity, but that duration, how long we're in seed fill and flowering is much longer with those timely plantings. Usually we're about 3 to 4 days on the average. Same exact variety. When we plant late April or early May, we're at least 3 to 4 more days, pod development to seed fill. Any idea how many bushels per acre per day we're putting on at the fastest point, this linear seed fill? How many bushels per acre per day we're putting on? How many think it's just 1 or 2 bushels? Okay? Got the ump in the back, thank you. Strike 2. All right, he's got to go ump the game later. All right, so we're about 3 bushels per acre per day. Intensely managed, I've got 4.5 bushels per acre per day. Per day. So if you lose out on 3 days on a moderate seed fill kind of situation, that's 9 bushels right there. Okay? That may not seem like a lot, but that certainly adds up. Timely planting is huge. That's kind of the background of that. Just to kind of give the Indiana data that our growers have heard this message, and this is our 5-year average in terms of planting date across Indiana. All right, so half of our state still not planting until the 20th of May. I wanted to be faster than that. Let's walk through these. 1988, 91, 2012 had some of our fastest planting paces on record. Those happen to be what kind of years? Any guesses? Drought years. Yeah, there's some smiles. So I was assuming. I remember 1988 as a kid. Okay, I mean it was bad. 2012 was a drought year as well. Now we go into 2018, 2020, 2021, 2023. The theme is still here, right? Those are some of our fastest on record as well. Those are also our state record-breaking years, continually, right? So our drought years, we were off 30%. Got some rains that came back late in 2012, so we were only off 12% in a drought year. Look at 2018, we broke record. This is state level yields, 57.5. Then a couple years later, 2020, state record yield again. 2021, another state record. 23, another state record. Sensing a trend here? Okay. So again, timely planting's huge. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I also want to kind of give the whys of not just plant early. It's like, here's why we get the benefit out of that. Okay? That's saying the same basic thing. All right, here's a fun one. I'm guessing did not come up north to Canada, but I'll see if it did. I'm guessing you guys never did Oregon Trail back in school. Oregon Trail's a U.S. thing, right? So it's about going out west whenever we were exploring the rest of the U.S. Country. And so we had a computer program when I was in school called the Oregon Trail. That was a trail that went to the west. And so this is my cutesy way, and sorry I left it in here. It doesn't go well with you guys. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But that's where, go west, go to the frontier, go to something else, right? So we just always hope we didn't die of dysentery on that game, okay? So basically it's just like, all right, what can you do? This is, what was the year? 1848, right? We're going west. All right, who cares about that? All right, so within this, I hit a little bit of the sulfur talk this morning, some of the basics. I want to kind of advance a little bit in this and where we're gaining ground, not just the sulfur deficient fields, okay? These interactions that we've been seeing, I hit at a few of the stops that people are through, but I want to hit it a little bit more. It's been a real interesting storyline here, okay? You've already done this one. I'll pass that out. That's that classic deficiency, right? This is that sandy ground, okay? This checkerboard pattern that looks amazing in terms of like, man, I didn't think we could see responses like that. So that's that classic deficiency. I talked a lot about this morning, all right? You saw those pictures already. Let's move on. Just to hit the high level, 15 to 20 pounds, that's my reference strip. Can we take a look at this in another way, looking at leaf samples? Sure. Like one or two of the groups, I hit this one. Be careful as we blend with potash because we can have some chloride toxicity when it's done close to planting. Right? So again, zip past some of this to get into the interactions. Here we go. Here's the next set, what I call situationally deficient or situationally responsive to sulfur. We just established some foundational things. We need push planting dates, right? We think about those planting dates tend to be what? Soils tend to be cool, wet, right? All of that comes into mind. So this picture here, this is from my West Lafayette farm on the prairie dirt. It's 3.5–4% organic matter. Right, this picture is taken near the end. I think I should have it, I don't know, like August 30th, so basically now. It was 2 years ago when I took this picture, but the same thing's happened for years. So here's a place where we're creating sulfur responsiveness or sulfur deficiencies. We're pushing planting dates. This planting date was an April 22nd for us, okay? And we're already starting to senesce, right? That same storyline that you see with the sulfur playground, I'm seeing on prairie dirt when I push planting date, okay? So then we get into this, on the left, no sulfur, on the right, it's 20 pounds of sulfur, same exact variety. Okay? So let's walk through some of these. I'm going to kind of bust through them a little bit. 2018 is when I started looking at this on the prairie soil with a lot of different treatments. I'm not expecting you to get in all this, but basically it's untreated control versus several different soluble sulfur sources. And with the timely planting, and Henry, I didn't have enough tile drainage on this farm. My running joke was, here's the contribution box. We need more tile drainage on this farm because we couldn't push planting on it. We were May 12th. That's not exactly super early. I got criticized for that, but like, I'm not slamming it in open seed slides. And so, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's how we worked it as chiseled ground. Last 3 years, we actually switched to VT. I'm able to get into my mid-Aprils, okay? Again, right, wrong, or indifferent, we can have a nice discussion about that, but we're pushing planting dates now because of how our field prep is. But even still, May 11th on this one, we went from 62 bushel beans to 70s. The late planted first week of June, nothing going on. All right, you're going to see the same storyline in 2020. It was an 18 bushel response. In 2019, we had the latest planted crop ever. Our first planting date was in June, so it's not even up here on this data set. 21, same thing. 22, all that's going to come into on the prairie soil time and time again. When we push our planting dates, we're an 8 to 11 bushel responder, AMS, pelletized gypsum, any of those sources. The other side of it, a lot of people want to go to nitrogen. So, well, it's the nitrogen. No, it's not. All right? I put in urea in these applications in some cases. And I brought in pelletized gypsum. It is a sulfur play because we have poor nodulation. Because we have fewer, what? Amounts of sulfur, limited mineralization. That's that storyline. The late planting dates, nothing. Same exact soil. It's side by side, go back and forth, back and forth. All right, so pushing planting dates, we're looking at adding some sulfur there. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Yep. So the question about that N and the S. So the N and the S in the early years, so the total nitrogen I was looking at was 40 units of nitrogen. So if the first in 18 and 19, we did it that way. The 18 and 19, we did it that way, where we had ammonium sulfate and then we added the urea to get to 40 units. In the latter years, I used gypsum as the sulfur source and then 40 units of nitrogen as urea. So yeah, there is a tinge for that to be a little bit higher. When you look at stats, it's not, but I hear you, because I've seen that tinge of maybe an extra bushel or so with that nitrogen component that adds to it. But I dare say if we're trying one thing, I'm at least doing like an AMS that has a little bit of nitrogen, or I'm just doing the pelletized gypsum. But yes, I tend to see that same thing. Good eye. The gypsum I added in looked good. The urea by itself was not playing out. Okay, so that's that that planting date aspect of it. Nutrient concentrations. I made that comment this morning. Let's kind of go back to those. This picture is in the end of August, but when we took the leaf samples at R3 to kind of give you those numbers, our leaf sample, leaf sulfur concentration was 0.26. Again, by strictest definition, that was not deficient. Okay? By strictest definition. It gets you close. This is what I talk about, these leaf samples. The nitrogen sulfur ratio was 19:1. We were well in balance. So 18:1 or higher tend to be the place where I look at that, versus those that have the AMS up front were 0.31. Again, that doesn't seem like a major swing. Those percents, that's deceiving. If we talked about parts per million, I think it had more to play. But just realize that's a major swing in terms of concentration, as well as that nitrogen sulfur ratio 17:1. Okay? Here's 2023. I think that was my second slide I wanted to lead in. So this is where we went from 77 bushel beans to 99 bushel beans. It's that plot right there. It's that exact trial. Crazy numbers. Again, I'm not saying this is going to happen in every field, but it's certainly enough to open our eyes to look at, we might want to think about that if we're pushing planting dates. So April 18th, 77 bushel beans by just planting on 15s, not doing anything else. We added AMS, we had pelletized gypsum. The ATS we didn't get out that year because it rained by the time we got there. We did run 101 with the nitrogen and sulfur, so that's going to be the 40 units of nitrogen, 20 units of sulfur as pelletized gypsum. So good looking crop, 22 bushel response. May 12th, still timely. We bring in 90 bushel beans. ATS, this morning I talked to you guys about ATS kind of being, it's there but not quite there. Here's the case. It yielded well, but not as well as my ammonium sulfate, not as well as my pelletized gypsum. The other aspect of this one, we preach on soybeans to plant timely, right? If you're to look at this scenario and just look at the yield level for untreated control, is that much to write home about when I look at April 18th versus May 12th? 77 bushel beans, 75 bushel beans. If you didn't do anything else, if you just did a planting date study and did nothing else, that's 2 freaking bushels. That's not much to get worked up over, right? But now that we're managing in a different way and understand that we have some cool soils, we probably have some issues with soil, right? And now we get the 99 bushel. Oh, that's a pretty big deal. Now that sulfur application on the May 12th, they're still good looking beans, they're 90 bushels, but guess what? 98 still beats 90, right? So again, this pushing the foundation, right? Planting date's part of it. Now understand what's being limited or not being limited. Go off the deep end the first week of June. Again, that's not ideal for high yield management, but for this interaction of sulfur, no difference. Okay, again, that prairie soil as an example. Okay, any questions on those interactions? Okay. Take homes of that, we continue to see this benefit when we push our planting dates, these soils that are cool. We see an issue of sulfur supply, all right? I think there's some good observations that we have, as well as data that goes into the leaf retention, seed size. Protein, we also have an increase in protein. We're usually about a 1 to 2% absolute increase in protein. So if you have a market for that, You know, how many decades have we talked about we're going to get paid for our protein? We're not going to get paid for our protein unless you actually have a market for it. But there is that increase, okay? Observations on the lake, we did not see it in this situationally deficient. It's not the sulfur playground, it's not the sand, it's the prairie soil, okay? Those cool soils. I made another couple of comments this morning. Higher residue, I think that's another great play for this to look at. Cereal rye, I don't think I have it in today's talk. I've looked at cereal rye, and we've had 7 bushel yield hits in the cereal rye because we had too much carbon, okay? But we've overcome it with sulfur, okay? I do want to say that it's not all rosy. Not every farm, every field gets this kind of response. And so this is my, okay, here's the disclaimer. Here we did this across the U.S. a few years ago and kind of laid out those fields that did respond and those that didn't. Those in this kind of a light pale yellow were the ones that were responsive to sulfur, all right? Those in green were not. And we took a little bit extra effort, and so we had 8 locations across from the Minnesotas down to Indiana that were responsive. Their fixation, right, we measured that, was 30 to 90%. So of the nitrogen being supplied to that soybean crop, upwards of 90% came from fixation. The sulfur play is one that's helping to boost fixation, okay? The 18, again, the 18 that were not, their fixation was nearly less, was 10 to 56%. So when we have fields that have less of their nitrogen being supplied through fixation, this sulfur play kind of washes away, right? And I just kind of want to explain that. As you look at this one step further, non-responsive years, right? I dove into the data we have. It's the soybean mafia is what I call ourselves, right? It's the soybean agronomics across the country. And so let me look at the data set. Of those 18, 5 were late plantings. Like, okay. Then I just get done talking about, hey, cool soils, late plantings, probably not going to be a place. Oh, 5 have been explained. All right, then we go into those with low pH. If you've got pH less than 6, especially if you're in the 5s, fixation, it's going down the drain too. So we can't exactly boost fixation if you already have low pH issues. I bring up the high pH. I don't know if it's as much of a deal, but there were 6. It's an observation. I'm kind of thinking through a little bit more. I know that you guys can deal with that a little bit. It can have a little bit of an issue on our fixation. So I bring that up as an observation. Those that responded in this nationwide data set, we were 6 bushel on the average. Midwest to the north were the primary locations with planting dates, April to May. Have one oddity, that May 25th, that's kind of on the later side. The rest of those were more on the timely side. Okay. All right, let's add a little bit more layers of management to this. Okay, so it's not just pushing planting dates and narrow rows and adding the sulfur to boost fixation. How many of the guys at the panel talked about fungicides, insecticides, right? I mean, that kept coming up and up and up, right? By and large, I don't see a lot of gain in just a prophylactic fungicide application on soybeans. I just don't, okay? But there's some things that come into the mind. Again, that's prophylactically. In other words, if we don't have the disease in high enough levels, we don't need it. White mold's a different scenario. So I'm thinking more of the Sacosta, the frog eye leaf spot, those types, all right? R3s, it tends to be the stage we look at. All right, so what I decided to look at was a simple yes-no sulfur, all right? And then crossed up with some foliar protection. So fungicide in early years was looking at Preaxor, and later years we looked at Revitec, as well as an insecticide, so a pyrethroid, okay? And I target R4. Industry standard is R3, all right? 3/16 of an inch long pod on somewhere on the upper 4 nodes, okay? I'm targeting an R4 that's 3/4 of an inch long. May not seem like a big difference, but that's about 10 to 15 days later, okay? That's my target. Any ideas why I'm targeting that versus the standard R3? Go back to my initial slides on varieties and how they've changed. What's going on later and later in the season? More seed fill later. A lot more dry matter accumulation later, right, than what we used to have. And so I'm looking to protect those leaves and pods later. So R4, I'm able to, as a researcher, that hat when that's on, to hit it directly. I dare say a lot of our guys that are pulling R3 applications are probably more like R4, because by the time you go over 10,000, 100,000 acres, you can't hit them all perfectly in R3. So full disclosure, I'm hitting R4. All right, let's walk through this one. So in this case, the West Lafayette site, so we got no sulfur in the first column, the second column is AMS, and then you kind of match the matrix up. Fungicide with and without sulfur, insecticide with and without, or the combination. Prophylactic application, we ran 67, 68, 67, no differences with those, with no sulfur underlying it. We added in the sulfur, and we had this interesting interaction. So at the top line, the sulfur really didn't do anything in 2019 on that data set. 2019 was our late planted year. So the sulfur by itself didn't do anything in 2019, but the sulfur applied at planting and then the R4 foliar protection, we gained what, 6, 7 bushels? 7 bushels, right? So, all right, maybe that's just an oddity. This continued to show up time and time again. Let me add this one thing. I dare say that more of it's due to the pod protection than the leaf protection. Pod protection with our insecticides than our fungicides. Bean leaf beetle, green stink bugs are the two that we're looking at. We were never at threshold individually. I've been pushing for years to get a pest complex threshold. Like, in other words, if we have a set number of bean leaf beetles plus the number of green stink bugs, now we're at a threshold. Individually, we weren't there, but if we take out 1 or 2 pods with whatever insect that's eaten, scarring up, or piercing it, that's 2 bushels. Every pod that's taken off is a bushel to 2 bushels, easy. So take 2 or 3 of those, and now we add that together. So in 2019, you saw that. 2020, nothing. So here's the thing that was interesting in that one. I bring that up because that was a June 3rd planting. All right, that kind of makes sense. We did not see a response. 2021. Guess what? We get a 6, 8 bushel response there, and then now again we add the insecticide and fungicides, and we add another 4 to 6 bushels. Individually, they did not do anything. So just adding in prophylactically, fungicide, insecticide didn't do anything. But when we had the base of sulfur, help with nodulation, fixation, leaf retention, ringing a bell. Now we're helping to protect those pods. We saw this kind of synergistic effect. Okay. Interactions that we're building into this. Same thing in 22. Guess what? It's done that way for a few more years. Okay. Question. I'm going to take a pause. I have no idea what I'm doing on time.
Why do insecticide versus fungicide? Your fungicide is giving something. Your insecticide really seems to be the one that stands out.
Yeah.
It's a bit confusing.
Yeah, so Peter asked about the fungicide and insecticide, which one's really the one playing out? By and large, with my R4 application, my thought process with this is the insecticides helping more on those pods that are further along in development versus the fungicide. Again, we're doing this all prophylactically. We do not have frog and leaf spot or anything else at that threshold. So the plant health benefit's not there. What I'm seeing is the insecticide is protecting those pods. Otherwise, those that don't have it, the pods are dropping off 1 or 2. But if they don't have the nitrogen concentration from that boost of fixation, there's not the benefit there anyway because there's no leaves to hold on to retain to finish filling those out. Versus if we've had more leaves through the sulfur supply, fixation, and we hold on to 2, 3, 4 more pods, now you start to do the math of that's, okay, now 4, 6, 8 bushels right there because of the pod protection.
So if you have an insect house there, you push that.
Yeah, so the insect thresholds, we have bean leaf beetles and green stink bugs in particular, they were never at threshold individually. That's where I go back to it. If we had some way to sum up, okay, here's the bean leaf beetle count, green stink bug, and then combination, if we reach this level, I think we now have a threshold. We just don't have that number yet. Good question, Peter. Yeah? Say that one more time. Okay, so the question about foliar fertility, right? Essentially, does that have any effect on floral development? I've done floral. Get tongue tied here. We get foliar fertilizers and to see if there's response. So whether it's the micronutrient package that has nitrogen, phosphorus, and everything else to it, versus those that are just manganese or anything else on a field that doesn't need it, I've yet to see the benefit out of the foliar nutrient package. Your question specifically was, okay, are we doing any damage to the flowers? I suppose you could. Some of those that talk about adding in boron as an example boron's needed for floral development and all of the pollen viability. I've yet to see benefit out of that. Where I've seen anything that's blowing off flowers, it's probably going to be something that's going to be more of the over-the-cover type application. A lot of guys early on said, let me burn the beans back, and in that, they burned off the flowers. I don't know if I fully answered, but that's where I've been on the foliar nutrition side. Other questions? Yeah, the foliar fertility, I don't see damage to them, but I don't see benefits on the work and the timings. Again, we can kind of work through that. If we're looking at it as a sulfur, let's think about that one. If it's a sulfur need, these 1-2 quart products at most are given a half a pound of sulfur. That's not enough. If that's truly the need, we need to be 3 to 4 pounds in the foliar and beyond that when we look at the ground. I'm going to switch gears and start to wrap up a little bit. I got crazy with it, so I decided to look at planting date with sulfur with the foliar protection. All right, so a 3-way interaction, the kiss of death with any researchers to start to do this kind of work. So within this one, in 2024, April 22nd beans, 80 bushel beans. We had the AMS, 91 bushel, so a 12 bushel response. Okay. Foliar protection, our Revitec and Fastec did nothing for us again. We weren't at threshold. I only had enough room and enough. I don't know if it's common sense or no common sense, but we brought in AMS plus foliar protection. No difference there in the 22nd planting date. Gypsum, no difference, 91 bushel beans. May 13th, here's where it gets interesting. Again, there's these just kind of situations that develop. We were in 77 bushel beans, all right? AMS by itself, 4-ish bushels, didn't pull out statistically, right? We got 4-ish bushels with protection, but when we had AMS plus the foliar protection, we had 11 bushel response. Okay, so this interaction of the sulfur with some level of foliar protection or pod protection, again, this has the insecticide side of it as well, has really been interesting over the last probably 3 to 4 years, this interaction that we're seeing. Okay, you go to the June period, and again, not really anything going on. Silver bullets, let's end up on silver bullets. Biologicals, are they the silver bullet? No. Done. No, there's so many in this space, right? Again, I'm being cutesy with it because I got 3 minutes, right? There's 1,200 companies in this space, over 1,200 companies in this space, right? I've looked at a lot of biologicals, nothing to the level that is 1,200 companies, but you know, I think we have to go back to understand what is the purpose of these. There could be. I've had some biologicals, actually I've had a few that I've got a blip. I've got a 3 or 4 bushel gain. I have. I've had them mixed in with sulfur treatments to help some of these, so the Vita Nutrition, I think they're in the slides that you got. We got 3 or 4 bushel a couple times, but I also crossed them up with sulfur. In those sulfur treatments, we got 13 bushel. So I'm like, okay, I'm going sulfur treatment, I'm not going biological, right? Then there's other ones that come into this mix of, okay, they're nutrient-related things. So whether it's nitrogen, whether it's phosphorus solubilizers, or whether there's some other aspects of those. We've got other ones that are seed treatment. So I'm going to end on this one here, all right? So again, soybean group across the U.S., we did this for 2 years, 9 different biologicals as a seed treatment all the way from the Carolinas to Indiana to Minnesota, and 9 different ones, okay? And within that, we saw nothing that was consistent. Surely over 100 sites, we would see something played out, all right? So what I push back to you guys is to understand what the biological is supposed to do. One example from that study, there's about 2 locations, if I remember correctly, 2 locations that saw a response to a glomus biological. Glomus is a species that's arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Essentially, you go to any soil fertility class, you think about, okay, how nutrients are taken up. You've got some fungi, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, right? You can say that 5 times fast, right? Impress all your friends at home. Basically, what that means is you got the fungi's hyphae that extend the root hairs, essentially, right? And so what really works well is in those low phosphorus soils, it can help take up phosphorus. Guess what? The 2 locations that responded to glomus, that same type of fungi, were low phosphorus soils. Okay? So that's my ending point here is, if you want to look at the biological as a silver bullet, let's understand what they're supposed to do. If you have low phosphorus environment, a glomus species might be perfect for you. If you got charcoal rot, trichoderma might be a good spot for us. Okay? But to understand how and why they're responding. We've got over 100 years of Brady rhizobium. You know what? Over 100 years of research and experience with Brady rhizobium. And last year, we learned something new. We had 14 to 17 years of continuous corn. Peter, what would the recommendation be going into soybeans if you've been 14 to 17 years? Make sure you put on what?
Yeah, we put on an inoculant, even though it probably wouldn't help, just as insurance.
Yep. Put in an inoculant, and I've even added one more, because I get enough text messages, emails, and everything else. Hey, Shaun, we've been out of beans for 5 years. They look horrible, nitrogen deficient. I said, well, do a 2x rate. Do a 2x rate of inoculant. I have zero data other than that's how many times I get this information sent to me. Or do 2 different products. Last year we had 3 locations that had 14 to 17 years of continuous corn. I don't think I have it in this one. I ain't got any slides set. We added inoculant A, inoculant B, a 2x rate. Guess what? They didn't respond at all. 100 years, and surely we would have seen a beautiful, nice striping of those with and without inoculant. And again, we factored in with, because guess what? Sulfur's needed as a cofactor for nodulation. Like, why not? Let's go and put it out there. The inoculant did nothing for me. The sulfur added 8 bushels. Huh, okay. So again, we're continuing to learn. 100 years of Brady rhizobium. I go back to biologicals that have been 3 to 4 years. There's a lot of special nuance to figure out where they play. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave you guys. Any questions? Maybe a slide or two here. There you go. Any questions?
Just one comment on Brady rhizobium. If they have low pH soils, they maybe need to inoculate after.
Yeah, low pH soil. So Brady rhizobium, you've got to have pH in the 6s, right? If you're in the 5s, the bacteria are not going to be as efficient. Nodulation will be poor. You have got to fix that. So if you're trying to play the sulfur game, or you're trying to play the inoculant game, and you run pHs that are 5, 5.5, 5.8, you're not going to play that game for very long. Yeah.
Can you work with PGRs?
PGRs, yes, there's plenty of work with PGRs. Now what? Yeah, so the question is about those that are kind of making shorter. I am all about an efficient plant. I want one that's compact, right? I think we can do that by our management of planting timely. I think our lower populations and our row spacing. That's the best way to handle that. Certainly there are PGRs. I spent 8 years in North Carolina, 3 to 5 years of that. 5 years was with cotton. There's a plant that's fun to deal with. The PGR's out the yin-yang on that. So methquat chloride, methquat borate. Yes, you can keep a cotton plant compact. To play that world in soybeans, I get to see it play out. Cotton is a perennial that we treat like an annual, and then we kill it at the end of the season. Quite literally. PGRs are out the wazoo on that. Other questions?